pursuit of capturing nature's beauty often drives photographers to get close to wild animals. However, this quest for the perfect shot can sometimes bring them dangerously close to an apex predator who wouldn't think twice about proving its dominance, leading to deadly outcomes. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. In today's episode, we go over 3 times an animal has fatally mauled a photographer who got too close. Welcome to Final Affliction.
Nestled in the far eastern reaches of Russia is a land of wild beauty and rugged wilderness, the Kamchatka Peninsula. Here, the earth boils and steams with hot springs and geysers shooting steam high into the sky. It is a place of raw power where the earth itself seems to be alive and breathing. It is also home to an array of wildlife, from the majestic brown bear to the elusive snow leopard, where they roam the land freely in harmony with the landscape. For those who dare to venture into its depths, the Kamchatka Peninsula offers an unforgettable experience, as the beauty of nature is on full display and the wilderness of the land can be felt in every breath. Vitaly Nikolayen was one of Russia's best-known bear researchers to date. He had dedicated almost 30 years, which was approximately half of his life, to researching these majestic creatures. The 66-year-old was also a senior ranger in the Kronotsky Wildlife Reserve, where he constantly patrolled the wilderness to battle illegal fishing and hunting. It was during these patrols that Vitaly followed the enormous brown bears of the Kamchatka Peninsula while documenting their social, mating, and feeding habits. In the evening, he would return to his cabin, light the kerosene lamp, and then document nearly 800 bear contacts annually. His work turned into one of the most significant records of brown bear behavior ever made. As the years passed, Vitaly plunged into repeated encounters with bears. He got very close and personal with the bears, who seemed to not mind sharing their space with him. His personal favorite was a 6-foot male bear that he had named Krasavchik, which means handsome. He was fond of Krasavchik and at times would lie next to the beast as it took a nap. In December 2003, Vitaly had stayed on the reserve instead of leaving his home to celebrate the holiday season. He had stayed longer than expected while finishing up his research on why some of the bears had not yet gone to their dens. Being winter, the bears were supposed to have gone into hibernation, warmly tucked into a hollow tree or under the roots of a huge tree. It was a Friday, and Vitaly was sitting by the window in his cabin with his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Outside, the world was a frozen wasteland. The trees were heavy with snow as their branches bent low under the weight. He took a sip of his tea, savoring the warmth as it spread through his body. He felt the tension in his muscles begin to ease as a sense of calmness washed over him. He had just finished packing and was waiting for his flight out of the reserve. As he stared out at the snow-covered landscape, Vitaly felt a sense of peace. The cold and the silence of the winter seemed to soothe his soul, and for a moment, he could not help but picture the warm reception he would get from Tatiana, his wife, upon his arrival. Her laughter was music to his ears. Her voice and grace made his worries and cares fade away. He missed her. He sipped his tea, lost in thought, as the winter world unfolded before him. He watched as the snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, with each one a unique and delicate creation. It was as if he was seeing the world through new eyes, a new dimension. This filled him with a sense of wonder and awe. And then he saw him. It was Krasavchik. His furry friend was headed to the half-frozen lake to quench his thirst. To kill the boredom, Vitaly decided to follow his favorite bear down to the lake, where he was sure to capture some award-winning pictures and memories to last a lifetime. He geared up and took with him his camera, flare gun, and bear spray, just in case things got out of hand. The lake was less than a mile from his cabin, and so he was sure he would be back before his helicopter arrived. As he stepped out into the snow, he felt the air was crisp and cold with a sharpness that seemed to cut through to the bone. His breath was puffing out clouds and the landscape was eerily quiet, as if the Kamchatka Peninsula itself was holding its breath. But he was no stranger to the harsh elements of this area, so he soldiered on. The growl of his friendly bear quickly freed him from his thoughts. He tried to trudge through the snow-covered trail in order to catch up, but the snow was deep and his feet were heavy. but he was determined. He quickly put on his cross-country skis, which allowed him to effortlessly glide across the snow-covered trail. He could see the bear's paw prints still fresh in the snow and was determined to keep up with Krasovchik. He pushed himself to go faster, his muscles strained and burned with exertion at the effort of pushing himself to the limit. He could feel the cold seeping into his bones, but he did not falter. He tightened his coat around him. The trail wound its way through the trees, and he followed it cautiously with his senses heightened by the knowledge that a bear was nearby. Moments later, he saw Krasovchik. There he was in a grove, sleeping soundly. His usually brown fur was now gleaming in the winter sunlight. This was going to be the perfect picture as a reward for his turmoil in the harsh weather. Vitaly took out his camera, but taking a clear picture was impossible as the snow-covered branches and tree trunks kept getting in his way. He then made the risky decision to get inside the grove. He took his skis and stuck them vertically in the snow, got down on all fours, and then crawled, ducking and weaving through the tight spaces as he made his way through the branches. His eyes were fixed on his friend Krasovchik and his senses alert. He could hear his heavy but rhythmic breathing as he struggled to make his way through the pouring snow. The sound was almost peaceful, a big contrast to the natural ferocity of the bear. His chest rose and fell with each inhale, and with each exhale, a small plume of steam escaped from his nostrils, dissipating into the chilly air. It was a sight that melted Vitaly's heart. At about 3 meters from the sleeping bear, Vitaly took out his camera, ready to capture the beautiful scene for his memory book, as he had done numerous times before. On Saturday, the following day, the helicopter arrived, ready to airlift Vitaly out of the reserve for his holiday. The pilot found packed bags and a cold cup of tea by the cabin's window, but Vitaly was nowhere to be seen. He without hesitation called the search and rescue team, which arrived promptly and began searching. They followed Vitaly's ski trail, and just about a mile from the cabin, they found his skis at the entrance of the grove, placed vertically in the snow, just as he had done the day before. The rescue team then followed Vitaly's tracks into the grove, and just about 3 meters in, there he was. Vitaly's body lay there motionless. His bear spray can was empty, which led the rescue team to believe that he had used it to try to save his life. In the snow, they could see Krasovchik's tracks where he leapt to attack Vitaly. It seemed that the spray hadn't deterred the bear from attacking him. On his right side lay the unfired flare gun, which was half eaten. His camera lay inches away from his body. It was bloody and broken. The search and rescue team brought his lifeless body back from the wilderness for goodbyes and burial from his family. Despite his numerous research journals, Vitaly's proactive approach of monitoring bears was broadly criticized by the conservation movement community, who argued that he went against the consensual passive method of ethology. In his defense, Vitaly claimed that he never underestimated the tenacity of the bears, but this wasn't how his critics saw it, as to them, his death seemed to be a confirmation of their worries. In addition, in excess of over 20 bears that had become habituated in the presence of Vitaly were easy targets for poachers and were killed just before and shortly after his death. As it is with nature, wild animals are just that, wild. One shouldn't get too comfortable when approaching wildlife, as their wild traits are intrinsically imprinted in their genetics, and they can snap at any time, leaving behind a lifeless body. For Vitaly, this was a lesson learned a bit too late, but his journals shall forever be a constant reminder of his contribution to the science and academic community. He was a great loss to both man and nature, and the very animal he based his life around ultimately led to his final affliction.
Michio Hoshino was born in 1952 in Ichikawa, Japan. As a teenager, he developed a passion and enthusiasm for wildlife photography. He was particularly eager to spend time in Alaska, having bought a photography book in which the village of Shishmaref was photographed. At the age of 19, he wrote to the village's mayor and received a reply 6 months later inviting him to visit. From that moment on, his career as a nature photographer was set, and he became one of the most accomplished photographers of his era, often being likened to the world-famous Ansel Adams. But tragically, his love for wildlife photography and the career path his skill and flair had paved for him led to a fearsome encounter that shook his family, friends, and colleagues. As a boy, Michio loved exploring the wilds of Japan. He was an adventurous individual who was captivated by the natural world around him, but also an avid reader of a range of different book genres. His love for storytelling and, ultimately, writing was a big part of his career as a wildlife photographer. At the age of 16, he traveled solo across North America. He visited all the big cities and the wonders of the likes of the Grand Canyon. When he returned to Japan, he attended Keio University, graduating in 1976 with a major in economics. It was during his time there that he came across the grainy photo of Shishmaref that sparked his interest in Alaska. He wanted to know how the tiny community survived in such a bleak and inhospitable environment. He had so many questions, which is why he penned a letter and simply addressed it to Mayor Shishmaref, Alaska. During one of his university summers, he spent 3 months in the Eskimo village, living with a family and getting stuck into their way of life there. He returned to the state to study wildlife biology at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. He had secured some work experience with a professional photographer and put his own photography skills to the test. He would venture off to the remote Alaskan wilderness in pursuit of the perfect shots. He documented his ventures in numerous essays. He had a unique ability to bring his storytelling to life, and through it and his photos, he brought the natural world of Alaska to people in all corners of the planet. His work soon earned him prestigious awards, and it was showcased all over the world. But his final photo, or at least what was believed to be his final photo, became one of his most famous yet. It was August 1996, and Michio had been assigned to work on the filming of a documentary about brown bears. He left his wife, Naoko, and his son, Shoma, in Alaska and set off for Russia. At that time, he and Naoko had been married for 3 years. The destination for Michio and the television production crew was Kurovskoye Lake, situated on the Kamchatka Peninsula, situated in the Russian Far East. The lake is a crater lake formed from the explosion or collapse of a volcano. It is surrounded by bush and trees, mostly alder, pine, and stone birch. Back in 1996, the lake, which is a nature reserve, was thought to have the highest population of brown bears in Kamchatka, and possibly even Russia. This was precisely why Michio and his team were headed there. They were guaranteed exceptional viewing of bear activity. The documentary they planned on filming was for a Japanese television station. The team's field guide, Igor Ravenko, who was a local expert, took the team to a known bear haunt. Rumor has it the guide knew of a bear that was unafraid of humans. It continued to fish in the crystal clear waters as people approached it. This was a photographer's dream. The team were able to capture unique and up-close footage of the animal as it continued to behave in its natural way, just feet from the cameras. But 2 days later, Igor, the guide, spotted some disturbing signs around their camp. Bear scat and markings were visible in and around it. When the team had been out in the wilderness, the bear had investigated their campsite. A chill ran down Igor's spine. Were they now the hunted? On August 8th, the production team had stopped work for the day and settled down in their cabin for the night. The cabin was full, and Michio opted to sleep outside in the tent. Igor advised him against it, knowing that the bear had already ventured into their camp and was unafraid of humans. But Michio insisted on staying in his tent. Not only did he prefer being closer to the great outdoors and having his own space, but he couldn't stand the sound of other people snoring. Being under canvas just yards from the cabin was a much better option for him and would ensure he'd get a decent night's sleep, or so he thought. The day had been long, and Michio quickly nodded off to sleep, warm in his sleeping bag, listening to the sounds of nature. But in the darkness outside, something stirred. It was a large grizzly bear that was prowling the surrounding woodland. It sniffed the air. The scent of the production team carried on the wind. It walked nearer, coming in for a closer look. Michio continued to sleep, unaware that his dreams were about to come crashing to an end. At 4 a.m., just before the milky haze of the dawn light, the bear sniffed outside Michio's tent. It snorted, and the vegetation under its heavy paws rustled the other side of the canvas. Its long snout was inches from Michio's face. He suddenly woke. The rustles, the deep-throated growling, and the loud sniffs had risen him from his slumber and had alerted him to the danger outside. He held his breath, listening and waiting. His mind was racing, and his heart began thundering in his chest. There was no way of alerting the others inside the cabin. All Michio could do was stay still and silent, hoping that the bear would lose interest and walk away. But the bear had other ideas. It had smelt something inside the tent, Michio himself. Suddenly, it slashed through the canvas with its front paws. There was nothing to protect Michio from the beast. It was in predatory mode, intent on securing its prey rapidly. Michio cried out in alarm and kicked at the face of the bear as it lunged through the canvas. His screams were heard by his colleagues in the cabin. Their guide, Igor, heard the commotion unfolding outside. It was 4 a.m. He opened the cabin door to see the back end of an enormous grizzly sticking out of Michio's tent. The bear was mauling the photographer, and Igor shouted, "Tent! Bear! Tent!" Everyone leapt out of their beds and ran outside. Michio was putting up a fight, but the bear bit down on him repeatedly, tearing flesh and biting into bone. He was powerless in the mighty beast's jaws. It shook its head from side to side, and Michio was thrown around like a rag doll. His colleagues were just 10 meters away. The tent had collapsed under the bear's weight, and underneath the canvas, Michio was grappling with the grizzly. Immediately, Igor grabbed a metal bucket and a spade. He ran towards the dilapidated tent and the ensuing attack, hitting the two items together. They crashed and banged in the night, the metal on metal ringing in their ears, but by the illumination of their flashlights, the bear didn't even flinch. Instead, it tugged and pulled at Michio, dragging him from his sleeping bag and into the dark, cold night. The others shouted at the animal, but it was in vain. It dragged Michio into the woodland and out of sight. His cries died down, and his friends knew that he had likely succumbed to his injuries, but in the darkness, they couldn't see anything. They had to wait until first light before they could track him down. They found his body in the woodland. It was a devastating finding and traumatic for those involved. The attack had happened so quickly and was thought to have been an exceedingly rare predatory attack. The noise from those who witnessed the attack and tried to intervene didn't deter the bear as it normally would. As news spread about the terrible incident, a photograph emerged on the internet and went viral. It was a disturbing image, and the caption claimed that it was the last photo Michio had taken on his camera. In the photo, an aggressive grizzly bear peers in through the open door of a tent. It's a terrifying image showing the bear's long canines and dominant stance, apparently seconds before it launched its attack on Michio. But it is, in fact, a fake. The lighting on the animal is different from that on the tent. Outside is broad daylight when the attack occurred at around 4 a.m. Although Russia's north does experience daylight nights, in August on the Kamchatka Peninsula, sunrise is between 5:30 and 6:30 in the morning. It was found that it was a Photoshop photograph which was entered into a competition called Worth 1000 Photoshop. It was entered under the category entitled Hoax Last Photo Taken Before Death. Those who knew Michio only had the nicest things to say about him. He was an incredibly humble and modest man. When meeting somebody new for the first time, he would ask them about their story and listen intently, rather than talking about himself. In 1992, he founded the Aurora Club, which gives youths in Japan the chance to experience Alaska. His hope was that it would enrich their lives just as it had for him. Now, 3 decades later, the club is still running, and Michio continues to inspire the younger generation, as his photos and written works are still used throughout Japan today, such as in school textbooks. Michio was missed by so many that 12 years after Michio's death, his life was commemorated at Halibut Point State Recreation Area, just north of Sitka. Woodcarver Tommy Joseph carved a totem pole out of a red cedar tree. Depicted in it was Michio at the bottom, holding his beloved camera, and above him were the animals he loved to photograph, a fitting tribute to an inspiring man who left this planet too soon after meeting his terrifying final affliction.
It was August 20, 2012. Leila Rodriguez and Ethan Cruz eagerly boarded the Spitsbergen to Victoria cruise, brimming with anticipation for the journey ahead. As nature lovers and avid adventurers, the couple had been planning this trip for months. This was their grand vacation trip just before they got married in December of that year. The majestic Arctic loomed before them, promising a feast for the senses with its incredible views and the chance to witness some of the planet's most remarkable creatures up close. The couple was excited as they eagerly scanned the icy waters for any sign of life, hoping to catch a glimpse of the region's famed whales, seals, and polar bears. The tourists were left spellbound as the cruise pulled up to the shores of Ketavoya, offering up a front-row seat to one of the most awe-inspiring sights on the planet. The massive Kvittoy-Jakulan ice cap stood before them like a titan, leaving them breathless. As Leila and Ethan disembarked from the boat and stepped onto the icy shores, their senses were overloaded by the raw beauty of the landscape around them. The other tourists began taking pictures. Leila and Ethan exchanged a look, both silently acknowledging that they would carry this moment with them for the rest of their lives. Unfortunately, it would be memorable in ways they couldn't have imagined. For the visitors, the island was the ultimate natural spectacle, a chance to bask in the glory of the Arctic's unparalleled flora and fauna. But as the tourists soon discovered, this was no ordinary zoo. The animals here were wild and untamed, free to roam the icy expanse at will. To get their perfect shots, some of the tourists began getting too close to the animals. Leila and Ethan caught sight of a group of seals basking on the icy shores in the distance. With a sense of childlike wonder, Leila and Ethan slowly made their way toward the seals, careful not to startle them. As they drew closer, they couldn't help but feel awed by the beauty of the creatures. With the both of them equipped with DSLR cameras, the two began taking pictures of the seals. Leila and Ethan's eyes were glued to their camera screens, their fingers clicking away as they tried to capture the perfect shot of the seals. They were so absorbed in the task at hand, they didn't hear the commotion behind them. It was only when other tourists and tour guides began shouting, their voices raised in alarm, that Leila and Ethan realized something was wrong. At first, they thought it was just excitement, a reaction to the seals they captured on film. But as the shouting grew louder, they turned to see the other tourists frantically pointing somewhere behind them. Puzzled, Leila and Ethan scanned the horizon, searching for the source of the commotion. But it wasn't until they turned around and saw the polar bear lurking, its massive form camouflaged by the ice and snow. The sight of the massive polar bear just a few meters away was enough to freeze Leila and Ethan. Their minds struggled to make sense of the surreal, terrifying situation unfolding before them. The tourists and tour guides made a desperate effort to scare off the bear with loud noises and shouts, but the creature was undeterred. Eventually, Leila panicked and broke away from Ethan, her mind consumed by fear. It was a grave mistake. The moment she started running, the bear's predatory instincts kicked in and it chased Leila. The creature's eyes were fixated on Leila as she desperately ran for safety. However, she was no match for the speed and power of the bear as the creature closed the distance between them within a few seconds. Ethan followed the bear, attempting to scare it, but by then the creature had already lunged at Leila, knocking her violently to the ground. Because Leila was turned away from the bear, it grabbed hold of her head and bit mercilessly at her skull. The tourists were shocked at the horrific event unfolding. They slowly approached the bear, arms raised, and made as much noise as they could. One of the tour guides, who was armed with a pistol, began shooting at the bear, grazing the creature. He was hesitant not to hit Leela in the scuffle. However, the threat of bullets did not seem to stifle the bear. It continued mauling Leela as she screamed in agony. Ethan tried throwing stones at the creature, but none of them seemed to affect it. Nobody had time to react, as everything happened within a few seconds. Eventually, the creature began gnawing at Leela's face, and she could feel the teeth puncturing through her eye socket. Soon, her screaming stopped, and she began to lose consciousness. The tour guide then shot several more rounds at the bear's shoulder, finally inflicting enough damage on the massive creature to make a difference. The bear stumbled back and eventually succumbed to its injuries. Ethan rushed to Leela's side. She was badly mauled, but she was alive. The tour guides immediately called for help, and within a few minutes, a helicopter arrived. The paramedics airlifted Leela to a nearby hospital, where she had to undergo emergency surgery. The bite on the back of her neck was the most severe of her injuries, as the bear had missed her vertebrae by mere centimeters. Luckily, she survived the ordeal and made a full recovery. Surprisingly, Leela did not hold any grudges against the bear. "They were only doing what nature intended them to do," said Leela in an interview. However, she needed time to process her trauma and would stay away from the outdoors for a while after her tragic run-in with the powerful polar bear.